What's up guys, Tucker from Electric Cycle Rider. I've got the 2020 KTM Freeride E-XC in front of me, and it's just received a big overhaul with full factory off-road suspension. And I just want to run you through kind of what the differences are and what full factory did to this bike, because I know not many suspension manufacturers have had the opportunity to work on this bike, but now that full factory has been able to experiment with my bike, they came up with a really good solution for it, and I'm really happy with the results. So I kind of want to just dive into it and let you know what has changed on my fork and my shock, and get you some riding footage so you can see the bike in action. Now, if you've watched some of my initial videos with this bike, I did praise it in the beginning for having better suspension than the 2017 model. It comes with the WP XPLOR forks up front, as well as a PDS shock in the rear, and it is much improved from the 2017 model. But the more I rode it, especially when things got real rough and whooped out, I was really noticing the shortcomings of the suspension setup, and as much as I dialed in compression and rebound, it was still giving me a really hard time. Now, the forks that come on this bike are off of a KTM 85. They're 43 mil WP XPLOR forks, and it feels a bit undergunned for this bike. Now, there's a little bit of confusion with these forks. I think a lot of people think that you can just throw a different spring in there and it's going to solve your problems, but the issue is more with the valving on this fork. The problem with this fork is that it does not come with a mid valve, so it really limits the amount of tunability you have with valving. So what full factory did for the fork was install a Dalsaggio XP1 kit. Now, what the Dalsaggio kit does is it replaces the base valve, but it also adds a mid valve to the fork. So that really adds a lot of tunability to the fork, and it really adds a lot of comfort throughout the entire stroke of the fork. The initial feelings that I was getting with this fork was that it would deflect and be really harsh off of the initial hit. The beginning of the stroke was really rough, and I tried to tune that with compression, but sometimes when you soften the fork up so much, now you're riding deeper in the stroke and it gets more harsh. I could not work that out. So what I've noticed, like, if you're going fast and you start hitting these sharp edge bumps and rocks and roots, and it starts kicking you out of control, well, as soon as you're out of control, it doesn't matter how the rest of the suspension is going to work, because you're already out of whack. The great thing with this fork is it allows the bike to soak up a lot of those hits early on, and allows the bike to track straight, so you can continue to attack as the terrain gets rougher and you get deeper into the stroke. So no doubt a huge improvement there for the fork. Now, moving back to the shock, full factory did the Racetech Gold valve kit in the rear PDS shock. And although I'm not a total expert on the Racetech side of things, I know that the compression ports are larger on the valving for this rear shock, and that allows more tunability for the shock. Now, what would happen before the Racetech Gold valves is the initial hit on the rear shock would feel a bit wallowy, and as you got really deep into something, if you hit like a G out or a bunch of whoops or something like that, the rear shock would compress to the point where it would basically bottom itself out and then rebound and then kick the rear of the bike out, and it would cause me a couple instances, like I almost crashed as a result of that happening. It was like the bike would just start swapping out from the back. And I have to say, like, that was not very confidence inspiring. I'd be afraid to hit stuff going fast, because I know that if I hit it going too fast and I bottom this thing out, it was basically just going to send the bike up sideways in the rear, and it was getting really sketchy really fast. So the Racetech Gold valve has really solved that problem. I feel like the initial hit is really planted. The bike's not dancing around in the sharp edge stuff. Even at high speed, it stays really planted. And then as you hit those bigger, deeper G-out type whoops or any big dips like that, it gets stiffer through the stroke and is really nice and planted. I gotta say, I am super impressed. I'm gonna get on the bike and ride with you guys a little bit so you can see it. So the main thing I noticed is that the bike just stays on the ground more. What I mean by that is that it was deflecting a lot back with the original valving and causing the bike to hop around both in the front and back. I feel like my wheels are just staying on the ground more, and that's allowing me to get more traction overall, get on the power quicker, and it's very noticeable. And really it's just confidence inspiring. Like right there, the bike didn't dive or do anything weird in the corner. I just felt like it just hooked up. And that's a really good feeling. Just kind of skims over things. I feel like I could ride this bike so much harder. The biggest difference I notice is on the initial part of the stroke. Those choppy little rocks and bumps, this bike handles it way better now. Before it would feel really harsh, and that harshness is totally gone. I feel like I can plan what the bike's gonna do a lot more. It's kind of like getting used to riding this bike all over again. So this is a looser section right here. A lot of rocks. I feel like I'm just getting so much more traction. I don't know if you noticed, but I stood my rear wheel up there. Probably not anticipating the fact that the rear wheel was going to stay so planted, but the bike's not dancing as much. It feels really good. So the camera's probably not going to show this, but this is a pretty steep, loose, rocky downhill. Well, about to go down. And this part right here, man, that used to suck on this bike, and it just ate it up like it wasn't even there. I've got brakes locked up. Like, this is steep and rocky and loose, and man, this bike's handling it way better. It's not getting pushed around. Yeah, huge upgrade here, guys. If you're riding one of these Freerides off-road, you gotta do this. I know the forks and shock on the 2020 are better than the 2017, but man, the valving is not correct on it. I think the hardest part about the stock setup is you deflect a lot, and it's harsh in the beginning part of the stroke, and then you're already out of whack by the time things get going real rough. So I feel like I'm on track, and when I hit a bunch of small bumps, I can keep accelerating through them and know that the bike is going to continue to stay planted. Whereas before, you'd hit those small bumps, you'd get out of whack, and then you'd just be kind of out of control. Man, it just rides so much better. Now I've also got the suspension paired up with the XC Gear Mako 360, and that's also making this bike feel a lot better too. The Mako 360 takes out a lot of those sharp hits that are usually translated into your hands. Yeah, I've got my top 5 upgrade video for this bike, but I gotta say, suspension is so high up on that list. God, this thing feels just feels night and day better. Now, just to reiterate, I'm using the stock spring in the front and rear. I'm about 160, and yeah, it's working great. It really comes down to the valving, and I think especially in the fork, just now having a mid valve, it's just working way more efficient and doing its job in every part of the stroke. Here's that chunky part. Woo-hoo-hoo. Yeah, I'm not used to getting so much traction right there. It's like sending the front wheel up off the ground because the rear end is so planted through that. I'm just putting power to the ground. So Brian wasn't sure at first if the XP1 kit was going to work with the 43mm forks, because the kit is often put on the full-size 48mm XPLOR forks. But yeah, really happy that it works on the smaller 43mm forks, because it takes more than just revalving this fork. It needs a mid-valve, and it really shows how much better this bike is riding right now. Man, God, suspension is so impressive. All right, guys, if you can't tell, I am super impressed what Full Factory has done to this bike. I have a lot more confidence riding it now. It's taken off a lot of those initial hits, and I can just ride it faster and more comfortable. So huge upgrade there. I really think they knocked it out of the park. So I've got a link in the description. If you mention Electric Cycle Rider, they'll give you that discount, and I hope you take advantage of it because it is such a good upgrade for this bike. And yeah, a lot more to come, but thanks as always for watching, guys.